Episode 22, Winded City Countdown, or 88 Away, as the cousin Joey likes to say, who was also texting me today, said, "Hey, where's my podcast?" I said, "We're doing it tonight." He said we are now his drive home listen on
That,
Mondays and
that's
Wednesdays.
disappointing.
Is that an indictment on what
He's
he
got
listens
the worst
to?
part is he's got like a 10-minute car ride, so
Well, he was really upset that we didn't have a podcast. Anyway, I'm Scott Sternal, joined with Ben Russo and Matt Urich, and shout out to the cousin who enjoys listening to us. Him and I had a nice text back and forth this week about David Stern controlling the NBA and the NHL still, and how he placed Gary Bettman once upon a time in the NHL just to ruin the lives of every hockey fan around the country, because that guy is an absolute bumbling idiot. I'm just gonna say that the 8:40 start times are a preference of all, and Gary Bettman doesn't even talk like that. Like I'm too nasally on that, but that guy fucking annoys me. He is like,
yeah.
if you go back to 1994, the NHL and the NBA were on par with each other, and then Gary Bettman became the commissioner, and the NHL went in the toilet, much like the Blackhawks season last night. That's a segue right there, ladies and gentlemen, if I've ever seen one. Ooh, it was disappointing, but I reflected on this a lot today, and I will say, I'm not as sad over this one as I was when they lost to the Kings in Game 7. Now, obviously, more on the line against the Kings a few years ago because of, they would have gone to the Cup and more than likely would have won
Probably
the Cup
won.
against. So, I mean, there was a chance for another Cup there. But I found myself, and I said this to Katie as we were going into the third period last night, I said I found myself rooting more against St. Louis than for Chicago. Do either of you feel that way the day after? Because that's definitely how I felt, and I don't know if that has a lot to do with just how the season, progressed. But Ben, what do you think?
I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, I don't. At this point, I'll be rooting against St. Louis. I can't say that in the series. I would say, oh yeah, I definitely found myself rooting more against St. Louis. I mean,
Not in the series, but last night, like at the end, that's kind of where I
no,
found myself.
no. I mean, obviously, I wanted Chicago to win. I mean, at the end of the day, that was what it came down to. I think for me, I mean, we talked about it earlier today, so I had two ways of looking at it. Number one, them losing. I think when I picked them to win, I think it was more me banking on the fact that Taves and Kane and this core were gonna turn it up a notch. And I mean, you just saw throughout that, Kane definitely came on strong. I mean, he had a little bit of unfortunate, the opposite of puck luck, if you will, whatever that would be. He had some clean looks and some misses that were near misses, almost went in. Could have tilted the series either way, but I mean, he played well. But everybody else, Tays. I mean, I hate saying it because he does so much other than on the score sheet. But I mean, he had a tough series. I mean, it was a tough series for him. No goals. Obviously, he's going to impact the team. Seabrook having some unfortunate turnovers. I mean, even Keith last night with some unfortunate turnovers.
And even with all that you're saying, I mean, with 10 minutes to go in the season, it's 2-2.
You were right there.
You're right there.
And that's what I mean. Is like I don't necessarily know that I didn't think they'd win, but I was banking on the fact that they would turn it up a notch. And we'll get into it here, but me and you talked about it, and Matt kind of jumped in last night. It's not so much that the season's over; it's just we're going into an off season where there seems to be another opportunity where they're going to have to do some sort of a teardown. And you're going to see a roster overhaul, and there's not much coming up through the minors to replenish the system. I don't know what they're going to be able to do to really fix the glaring need at the defensive position.
The defense is the big one, and we'll kick it over to Matt here. There's 6 unrestricted free agents, 3 restricted, and a lot of cap problems going forward. Matt, you were, we talk often for you about you being you're the new fan of the three of us. I mean, Ben and I, we went to games in high school. We were fans in the 90s. I mean, Ben and I grew up playing, NHL 93, NHL PA 93 on the Super NES, NHL 94 on the Genesis. Ronick in those games was awesome to play with, and the Hawks were a big part of my childhood growing up. And then, of course, I know Ben and I both, we had a period where we both abandoned the team because Bill Wirtz was so bad. So for you last night, Matt, I mean, this is, still kind of new territory for you, right? Like, where Ben and I are like, yeah, I go back to my childhood and go, yeah, the Hawks, they lost a series. I've seen that before. Yeah, they've won in recent memory. But for you, it's been all French fries and gravy.
Yeah, it is really odd, I guess, because, I mean, for me, the first game I ever went to was with Ben back in 2007, I believe. 2007, 2008, whatever was Tays and Kane's rookie year, so whatever year that was. But, I mean, pretty much since 2009, they've only lost in the first round, before...
Third time.
Third time?
Yeah, they lost to Vancouver in 7, Phoenix in 6, and now St. Louis in 7.
I forgot about the Phoenix one. And
we all like to forget about that one.
Yeah, Mike Smith standing on his head.
And Marian Hossa almost dying.
Yeah. The thing for me, I guess just because it's been such a new experience for me over the last 7, 8, 9 years, whatever it's been, is that for me, even when they went down 3-2 last night, with 11 minutes to go, that I still had the complete confidence that this team would figure it out. I've said all along, and I hate saying like teams can flip a switch, but this Blackhawks team has always shown they can flip that proverbial switch. So like, to me, I still felt confident, granted as the minutes wore down, and then you get that Seabrook post-to-post shot. It was just heartbreaking because that was it. To me, that was, all right, if this game goes to overtime, there's no way the Hawks lose this thing. So it was overall disappointing. And it's weird, too, because when they went down 3-1, I was sort of, yeah, okay, I get it. Bad series for them. They meet up with a very good team in St. Louis, and then for them to battle back to win the double overtime game, to win on Saturday, force a Game 7. I had all the confidence that they would win yesterday, and yeah, a little disappointing, to say the least.
It really was something when Olczyk last night in the post-game show, he talked about how, that post-to-post type of shot, you only see that once every so often, and we had it happen twice in a series, and both of them were game-changing.
Crucial, yeah.
I mean, I really do believe if Ladd scores in Game 3, it's 3-1. I know that the Hawks ended up losing that game 4-3 or 4-2 or whatever, but it just definitely felt a lot like the Hawks were going to get that one if they if Ladd gets that. And then last night, I think if you really wanted to know what St. Louis mental fortitude was last night, I mean, they did prove it, but that would have been the ultimate test had definitely that Seabrook goal gone in. And Matt, I think there were 4 minutes left when that Seabrook won.
Yeah, right around there. Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, it's bad. Ben,
if anything, at least, we joke about it and we talk about it. How St. Louis is, a giant choke job, especially in the playoffs, and obviously history supports that. But if that Game 2 loss didn't destroy them, you knew that, like, mentally, because they didn't really have those huge mental gaps like they've had in the past, where all of a sudden, you talked about it last night, Scott, where it looked like they were headhunting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that not to the extent that they normally do it, and that's where the St. Louis team is different. They weren't.
That was the most it felt like penalties. They headhunted. That was the most it felt like they headhunted all series, and it still wasn't that much.
Right, and that's nothing compared to like just the dumb penalties that they would take consistently, the last 3 years. I mean, this is clearly a different team. They're a very good team. A team I think we all we all did underestimate, but I think deep down, I think we all realized that they were a really, really good team.
I think it was. I think they were. It was, sorry to cut you off, but I feel like it was something where, like, we knew they were good, but I think we failed to convince ourselves they were as good as they really were. I mean, I think it was more us convincing.
Team. I think it was more us convincing ourselves that the Hawks didn't have as many holes as they seemed to have.
I agree.
And again, just part of the process of understanding this loss was I look back at I mentioned it again before we recorded about I think we all did about stubborn Coach Q, not having Dale Weiss or all these guys in the lineup until you're down 3-1. It just didn't make sense. I mean, why you had Mashinter in there
and
instead,
why Rundblad? Why Rundblad? And so a couple of things here. One is thought from the committee in Indian I want to talk about. And one goes along with my article that I wrote yesterday. So the Indian, I believe, it was either Fells or Fifth Feather that wrote the post game this morning or late last night, and he questioned if Q coached the Blues and Hitchcock coached the Hawks, what would the difference in the series be? And he even thought, could St. Louis have realistically swept the Hawks with a better coach? Because one of the big things going into last night was Hitchcock is just not playing Tarasenko, which I was like, how that guy wasn't iced 25 minutes last night is inexcusable. If St. Louis loses to Dallas next round and they think, oh well, we got past the first round hump with Hitchcock, so we're gonna stay with it, I think that's a terrible decision. I think that team, it's time to move on from David Backes. Tarasenko is your star. He should be getting the ice time of a Taves or a Kane because he is that good now.
Yeah,
and that's where they should be going with that team.
You saw it in what game was it where they had the footage of Hitchcock trying to say something, and Tarasenko just kind of like flaps his arm at him, like waving him off. It was the end of a period. I want to say maybe game 3 because I think that's when the Hawks were kind of controlling everything until late. So I'm thinking it was game 3. It might have been a later game. I don't remember for sure, but like you saw it. I mean, I think even Tarasenko's like, why am I not playing more? It doesn't make sense.
They did at the end of 2 periods. They had somebody on Twitter had the Kane Tarasenko comparison, and Kane had skated 7 more shifts and 6 more minutes. Tarasenko through 2 periods had just a hair over 9.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was about 10. It was about 10 minutes. I thought they said.
Just inexcusable. So there's that, and then to go to my article, one of the things I wrote about yesterday was how you remember all the things in the Game 7, right? And I can still see Kyle Campoli giving up Chris Campoli, sorry. Chris Campoli
remembers everything. Sorry, that was an ill-timed joke. Anyways.
No, it was okay. But you have Chris. I could still remember Chris Campoli giving up the puck at the blue line. I could still remember Seabrook and the deflection off of Cronwall. I could still remember Nick Leddy having the puck deflect off of him, and I will never, ever, ever forget last night. And now I'm just drawing a blank over the defenseman for the Hawks. Holy cow!
Remembers everything.
There it is, Gustafsson.
I'll never forget something that I can't remember.
But Gustafsson, with time, skates right into the check, and you look at that and you go, like, it happened, and I think I just started going. You all know, the on Family Guy, whenever Cleveland's house would get blown up and he's in the bathtub and the bathtub's like falling off the second floor, he's like, no. Like, I was doing a lot of that last night, and as soon as that happened with Gustafsson, I was like, no, shit.
And it had that feeling all night that whenever you didn't have your top 3, I guess even 4 defensemen without Keith, Seabrook, Hjalmarsson, Van Riemsdyk, like
babysitting,
and I mean, granted, Q did his best to sort of, put Keith with Gustafsson or Rundblad because both were pretty terrible. But it's still like anytime those guys were near the puck, it scared the hell out of me because like you said, there were continual mistakes, and it proves just how poorly, that back half of Chicago's defense is. I mean, you could even, in a sense, lump TVR in that. I thought TVR had a pretty good series overall, but there's still obviously question marks about him moving forward and in the future. And just that, man, that defense was just scary at best the whole series.
Yeah, so let's turn the page now to what lies ahead. Looking ahead, the Hawks are going to be looking to move Andrew Shaw for, hopefully, even though he's a restricted, hopefully some team will give up a high draft pick to get the rights to Andrew Shaw to negotiate with him. So that's on the table. You hope that you get Panik as a restricted to take a sub $1 million deal. Rasmussen, whatever, let him walk. Ehrhoff is not coming. That guy, he'll probably retire. Roosevelt, you'd have to think is done.
You'd have to think he's retiring,
right? Dale Weiss, you'd like to try to get him back, but I have a hard time believing that somebody's not going to shoot him $2 million, and the Hawks can't afford that. Fleischman, again, somebody's going to offer him over $1 million. And then you have the man shitter, who is terrible, and if he never wears a Hawk uniform again, that's fine. And then Andrew Ladd, so he's gone as well. So you're looking at the cap space. You have a Brian Bickle problem, and you need to find somebody to trade him. You wonder could you get a team. I mean, for me at this point, to get a team to take Brian Bickle, do you give Andrew Shaw away for free? Essentially. And I don't know that anybody even takes that deal, like Shaw and Bickle for a conditional 7th rounder.
I mean, if you feel like nobody's going to give you anything worth, draft pick wise, worth it with Shaw, for his rights, I mean, I guess you can entertain the idea. I mean, that's $4 million for Bickle coming off the books.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
That's money.
It takes you to $8 million or $9 million in cap space for nine guys.
Well, the thing too I read earlier
it
today.
Depends.
Go ahead, Ben.
The salary cap depends. Right now, the Hawks probably have about 6, right around 6. So if you get Bickle off, you're at 10. But then the cap technically could go up to 74.5 if it's a players association
clause.
Yeah, enacts the escalator clause or whatever. So hypothetically, if you can move Bickle, the Hawks could have like 13 to $14 million in cap space with that escalator, which obviously that then makes it a little more functional for you to even get maybe not a grade A unrestricted free agent on defense, but one of those next level guys, a $3-4 million guy.
Yeah, and I think looking at your forward group, looking at who played forward this year for the Hawks of the restricted unrestricted, you're really. I think you could get Panik at under $1 million, so that's one.
I mean,
guy
even
back.
if you can't, $1 million is fine. I mean, call it $1 million, you're fine.
Okay,
there.
so you could get him back at $1 million. So Shaw's gone, you got to replace him. You got to replace Ladd, and then you really got to just replace one of Fleischman and Weiss, So I mean, you need 3 or 4 forwards. I think it's safe to say we're going to see Nick Schmaltz right away next year. I have a hard time believing that they're not going to bring him up to the big club right away on that cap-friendly deal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've got that. You've got Tyler Mott. You got
Billy Polka.
Vaughn.
Billy Polka is going to come up, I would think. I don't know if Vaughn is going to make the leap.
Hartman could come up. Stroza had some time.
Yeah, you saw the local kid from Bartlett. Vinny, was it Harristroga? Is that right?
Hinostroza.
Yeah, Hinostroza.
So, I mean, you're gonna see a lot of that, and you're gonna see a lot of Coach Q screaming.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and we talked about that a little bit briefly last night via text. Scott, you made that. I think it was you, Scott, that said, could they just roll really young next year? Is that something
I mean, they're going to have a
realistic.
choice.
I
at a
mean,
certain
yeah,
point.
in a sense, they don't have a choice. But is that something, because we've seen the way that Q has been consistently throughout the time he's been in Chicago in regards to playing young guys. I mean, other than Saad, who's somebody he's really like hitched his wagons to and let them play from day one essentially.
Well, and don't forget with Saad. I mean, it really was. He was forced to play him. If you remember coming out of the strike season, everyone was like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna have we got Saad, we're excited," and then Saad was a healthy scratch against the Kings for Daniel Carcillo, and then Carcillo took a run at somebody during that game, injured his knee, and then he had no choice but to play.
And that was one of those Q's dying reverence for guys like Carcillo, which I'll never understand. But hey, he's got 3 Stanley Cups and I have none, but I'm also not an NHL coach.
Yeah, it's so hard to say what Q is going to do next year, and it'll depend on what Bowman does, because I mean, decisions are going to have to be made. You have to. I don't know.
It'll be interesting because I think you might. I think there is an outside chance that they move Tavo to try and improve the defense if they can't do it otherwise. I think
that's a huge mistake too.
Yeah, it depends what you get. I mean, if you can get a solid young defenseman who's cost controlled, who's proven, somebody with the same experience level as Tavo, I don't necessarily think it's a terrible decision. But assuming you don't, I think if you can bring back Panik, you can roll something similar to what you did in the playoffs and still be super competitive, where you go Kane, Tays, Panik at the top, then you go Anisimov, Tavo, Panarin, and then Kruger, Hossa. Obviously, you have to find somebody to fill Ladd's role there. And then at bottom, is just a mush of whatever young guys you have, with maybe like a veteran like Desi or something like that on the line. I think that's kind of what you're rolling with at this point.
Yeah. Well, and
unfortunately, there's not a ton of options really, unless you move either Bickle or another piece, which I don't really see them moving anybody else. I mean,
and
we all sort of discussed the idea, even though I highly doubt it happens, of moving Crawford, where we all kind of agreed you're moving Crawford to fill out the roster, not necessarily because there's really nothing behind Crawford. I mean, I'm not trusting Darling to be my number one goaltender. So unless you're moving Crawford and then trading for another goalie, I don't know why
there isn't another. I mean,
there's one of the kids off Anaheim would be about it.
Right, and I don't know. You better bring in something solid if you're gonna move $6 million worth of Crawford. I don't think it's for.
You need to get a pretty really good return.
Yeah, I mean,
for a guy that has won you 2 cups and
could win the Vezina this year.
Yeah, and given all the crap he's gotten over the years, that's completely unwarranted and all that stuff. It's just I would have to be blown away by an offer to move him.
Well, last summer we didn't think it was feasible that
Brandon Saad
was going to be moved, and then all of a sudden, I'm on my phone. I'm going, "What is this? What is this discussion that Brandon Saad is going elsewhere? This is ridiculous." And then he was gone, and I was Saad. I know that was lame, but I was though, because we had all talked about he was one of our favorites coming up. Now, there's one other part of this that really does need discussing, which is the Hawks gave away a lot at the deadline, and Ben is muted. I did not mute Ben. Ben's muted. No, he's not. You're back, Ben.
You didn't like what I said, huh?
I think we really there's got to be a discussion though on what Bowman did at the deadline, right? Traded Philip Deneau, a cost-controlled center. Not saying he'd be a great center, but he could have been your 3rd or 4th line center and cost-controlled for a few years, and maybe you feel better about some other moves you can make with some different players this summer. You traded a first-round pick to get Andrew Ladd. I mean, you made a lot of moves here, and the
They,
return
and
didn't
it was
work
something.
out.
And it was something that we discussed even when it happened too. That it was, it was that all-in moment for that front office, and I think we may have even did a podcast on it. I don't really remember, but talking about the fact that it's acceptable if they go in and win a cup, but now they get bounced in the first round, and you sit here and you're like, was it worth it? Was it worth giving up Dano? Was it worth giving up? Who came back in the sod deal? Marco Dano, giving up those.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and
But
shipping
you did.
off.
You sent off Dano. You sent off Dano. You sent off a first-round pick.
You send off essentially 3 cost-controlled players, because if you include that first-round pick in that conversation, and again, it was at the time I thought it was a really good deal. I thought getting Ladd, getting Christian Ehrhoff, getting Dale Weiss, right? Because Weiss was part of one of those deals, and to me, I texted you guys this too last night, that I didn't understand why Christian Ehrhoff couldn't get on to the ice. Was he that terrible? Was he that much worse than David Rundblad? Because I didn't understand them bringing Rundblad up at all. That made no sense to me. He played poorly when he was up with the team. He played poorly in Rockford. He had like a 2-week stint somewhere overseas, played somewhat well apparently, and then I don't know if that was enough for Q to believe that he was going to be the answer, and maybe because of his experience or whatnot from last year's playoffs. But to me, it frustrated me that Ehrhoff, a guy with experience, a guy who's been along, and I think he'd be an improvement over what Timonen was last year, because Timonen couldn't skate to save his life there at the end. But it's just frustrating things like that when you give up what you give up, and some of those guys aren't even on the ice for you.
So it should be an interesting summer. I think the Hawks, as we do our weekly news talk over the summer, there'll be a lot of Cubs, a lot of Sox stuff, but I think we're going to see come June, there's going to be a lot of Blackhawk discussion and a lot of things that'll, keep us interested in what next year is going to look like. And I often tell people, they're like, hey, you watching the Hawks game tonight during the regular season? I go, regular season doesn't matter. Regular season, I think, is going to matter a little bit in this town next year.
For the first time in quite a while.
And Ben, you are muted. I can't hear you. Ben is muted again. We have lost Ben. So Ben's going to pop back in here. But we're going to go ahead and move on to some Cubs and Sox talk. And I don't know if maybe that's why I felt good last night, Matt. Or not good, but not as bad.
Not as devastated.
Not as devastated, but man, it was nice that it's nice to know that the Cubs are good, and the Sox, even though I'm not a Sox fan, the Sox are good. It's just really nice to have those teams doing what they're doing on the respective sides of town. It makes this summer feel like, oh, it's no big deal that we don't have either team, or we don't have the Hawks in the playoffs going.
Yeah, and think about those years that we discussed before when the Hawks got eliminated in the first round. Would have been 2011, and what was the other year, Scott? 2012?
They went out in 2011, 2012, and now 2016.
Okay, so in 2011 and 2012, think about it. I mean, those were 2 pretty bad baseball teams on both sides of town too, and I'm betting that in April of both of those years, April, early May, you kind of already had a pretty good assumption of how bad those teams were going to be. So that would probably make it an even more stressful situation, or not really stressful, but sad situation with the Hawks losing. So last night, it was obviously disappointed that the Hawks lost. We all were. But then in my head, it was like, okay, well, we still got another 100-some baseball games to watch. Cubs are in first place. White Sox are in first place. I've honestly caught myself watching far more White Sox baseball here in the last month than I probably have watched in the last 5-6 years combined. So they're a fun team to watch. Cubs are obviously a fun team to watch right now.
Yeah, Addie Russell just belted a triple into the gap. So,
Yeah,
Ben, did you have a feeling, and let's hope Ben can jump back in here, did you have a feeling last night of, in the sadness, going, but at least I've got the Cubs now. At least I've got good baseball to watch. Did that enter your mind at all, Ben?
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
yes.
All right, I'm back. Perfect. Yeah, I mean, again, that's part of why I think the Hawks losing didn't necessarily tear me down completely, is because obviously right now we have the Cubs, the Sox, just both sides of town, just good baseball to watch, fun baseball to watch. I mean, even to an extent, we'll get into it with our top 10, but I mean, even the Bears, surprisingly are showing a little promise right now. But I think that's part of it, big time, is the Cubs. You have the Cubs and what they're doing and what they're putting together. Obviously, what's looking like a special season. I'm not sure if you guys saw it or not, and I don't even know if it was fake or not. But did you guys see that somebody in Vegas changed the Cubs win total to like 114 wins or something like that? Is their prediction?
No kidding.
Yeah. I don't know if it was real or fake, but Jesus Christ, man! Like, how can you project that? Like, that just seems crazy to me. But whatever, I'll take it. I think they've proven me wrong so far with their pitching. Their starting pitching, minus a couple of games, has been pretty much outstanding. Bullpen's been pretty solid overall. Obviously, Anthony Rizzo, for his batting average being low, I think right now he's second in home runs, second in RBIs. He's still got like a 360 on base. So, I mean, really, they're not even getting that hot. Some of their hitters aren't even that hot yet, other than Dexter Fowler. And look at what they're doing. Granted, they're not playing the best teams in the world, but these are the games they're supposed to be winning. So,
right. And honestly, though, I mean, in fairness to that comment, Ben, there aren't. I mean, the NL. We talked about this in our preview, right? Each division really has some three bad teams, right? Like the Phillies are bad, the Braves are bad, the
Braves are an embarrassment.
Yeah,
they have 3 home runs as a team.
and
there were 90.
I'm going to see them on Friday, and I'll tell you, man, I am just.
I'm
hoping to
cannot lose a game this weekend.
They shouldn't. They shouldn't lose a game this weekend.
Or all week, for that matter.
No, I mean the Brewers are bad. The Reds, as we saw, are bad. I mean, so you've got, of your 15 teams in the National League, you've got 6 that are just downright awful.
And this is pretty crazy. They were talking about this yesterday, Monday, on the Score, and with Fangraphs, they do their playoff percentage. In the NL, this is ridiculous. So in the NL East, Nationals and Mets both over 85% chance of making the playoffs. Phillies 0.1%, Marlins at just under 10%, Braves at 0%. They move over to the NL Central. Cubs are 95.8%, while the Pirates are 30%, Cardinals are 43%, and then the bottom 2 teams less than 1%. You look over in the NL West.
Matt, are you looking at the current odds?
Yes.
Because I'm looking at Fangraphs right now. Did you say the Braves are at 0?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I thought you said 0.1. I'm sorry. I was just gonna say they are at nothing.
Yeah, they're at 0%, and then you go down to the NL West, and you have the Dodgers with an 88%, Giants at 45%, the rest of the division under 10%. It's crazy that there's that big of a disparity a month into the season, and that just goes to show you how poor the NL is. Like, it's very extremely top heavy, 5-6 teams that are very, very good. The rest is pretty much garbage.
One thing I just want to say, I've read a lot of stuff how people are saying, like, oh, the Nationals and the Cubs, their record's so good because of the competition they're playing. There's no doubt that impacts it, but if you're going to doubt these teams, I mean, these are good teams. Like, the worst thing the Nationals have going is their manager, because come playoff time, that team's going to crumble. But if you're going to sit here and tell me that the Cubs aren't a good team, that they're just playing bad opponents, you're nuts. I mean, these are good teams. There are a good chunk of teams in the National League that are just complete garbage. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that takes away from what some of these teams are doing in general.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's as much that the bottom of the National League is just terrible, but I mean, you then look at the American League right now and the records. I mean, you've got 4 or 5. I mean, you've got a bunch of teams that are just middle of the road. 11 and 8, 10 and 9, 10 and 10, 10 and 12, 8 and 10, 9 and 8, 9 and 9, 10 and 9. I mean, just everybody is just kind of middling. You know, I always hope for the Major League Baseball doomsday scenario every year. You get down to like 3 weeks to go and you look at like the wild card standings, and I think Jason Stark on the Ocho does the article every year, like what would happen if like we had a 7-team tie for the wild card and division races. And I'll tell you, if it was ever going to happen, it feels like the AL this year, and I know it's early, but you look at everybody just kind of, no, we're all right. You really could have some interesting stuff happening come September with those races. So some good stuff there. The Bears, they draft this week, but we're not going to talk about that because we're going to ask you to go ahead and download the podcast on Wednesday. We're going to do a little draft talk before we get into our bottom 10. And then let's take 5 seconds here to give some respect to Tom Thibodeau and his magnificent mullet as he goes to Minnesota. I know Ben is a lifelong Minnesota Timberwolves fan, as well as
a rough road. It's been a rough road.
But on the flip side, you've got Leicester City that you're really excited about, who can win the Premier League on Sunday.
Oh, I'm so excited for Ben. It's just a great time for him in his sports life, and
it's a great time to be me. That's for sure.
So I mean, there's that, which is going to be a lot of fun. So we got Bears talk on the podcast. We know Tom Thibodeau. That Minnesota team, I'm really excited to watch them win like 70 games next year as Thibodeau runs all of them into the ground.
ISO,
everybody, ISO. So that should be good. But there you go. So let's close this up. Matt, closing thoughts on the end of the Hawks season?
It was a crazy, weird run, I guess, this year. Disappointing to say the least, but we got 2 good baseball teams in town, so we'll hopefully bank on them keeping us in happy spirits.
Ben, you got a closing thought?
Yeah. I mean, I'll just stay as positive as you can. I mean, I know obviously losing the first round stinks. I know it all seems doom and gloom considering the roster overhaul, but the one thing that you always go back to is they still have that core. They're still Kane and Tays are still young. You still got Duncan Keith. Hopefully, you still have Corey Crawford. They should be competitive. I'm not going to sit here and say they're going to be Stanley Cup favorites for a couple of years, but they should be in contention.
Yeah, my closing thought is just this whole year has felt strange since the Kaner incident back in August. No matter what you think about whether he did it or didn't do it, and whether the law was on his side or whatever you think of it, there is for a large section of Hawks fans the taintedness of that still kind of sucks, and I will say I think the Hawks had a bit of a they've got a bit of a PR struggle in front of them here, going forward, as much as they have a roster overhaul. I mean, it has not been a lot of good PR for the Blackhawks this year, between the Shaw incident in the playoffs, the Garrett Ross revenge porn charges, the Patrick Kane rape charges. I mean, just some bad PR. So I'm really interested to see what the Blackhawks do this summer in terms of that kind of housekeeping and what they're going to do there. And I'm really interested to see, I hope we hear nothing from Kane this offseason. I hope we hear nothing from any of the players, and they go and enjoy the fact that they actually have a summer off for the first time in 3 off seasons. So that was my closing thought. And I know we've always said we're not going to touch the Kane thing with a 100-foot pole, but I think it's hard to look at this season without noting that. I mean, you said it too, Ben. I mean, back in October, the Hawks came back. You were like, it's hard to watch after all that stuff happened.
Yeah, it was just a weird feeling. I mean,
yeah, and it is what it is. So hopefully next year, we get a little buzz back, and hopefully the Hawks kind of regroup some of that in-house stuff, and some new energy on the roster will make it a better time. So for Ben Urich, For Ben Russo and Matt York, I'm Scott Sternal. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes. We are in the Google Play Store. You can find us there. And be sure this Wednesday, tomorrow, or later today, I don't know, we're going to post it tonight. And then tomorrow morning, you'll see it. And then we may just post the other one tomorrow afternoon. So you might get two nice podcasts there before the draft on Thursday. Be sure to check that out because we're going to be talking about some of the favorite Bears of all time in that podcast. Thanks for listening.